In this video, I'm going to walk you through lesson 14 and talk to you about the final assessments for unit 7.1 from OpenSciEd. Okay, you've made it to the end of the unit. It was a long one, but students have really developed a lot of ideas about chemical reactions. And there's been several assessment opportunities. If you have not seen them or you're not aware of where they are, look at that unit overview document. At the very bottom of the overview document, it has lesson by lesson, the assessment opportunities, and what to look for. However, we are now at the end of the unit and there's going to be a summative transfer task. And this is very similar to most units from OpenSciEd. Now, in this final lesson, you're going to want to do a couple things. You're going to want to look back at your driving question board. And in this case, they are asking you to go back to the related phenomenon poster, because in transfer tasks, we look at related phenomena. We don't look at exactly what we've been studying the whole time. We see if we can transfer ideas to a new related phenomena. And this would be what we call a FAR transfer task. So it's not what we've been learning about specifically, not about bath bombs, but in this case, the summative assessment is going to be about the Taj Mahal. Now, the Taj Mahal assessment is two-part. The first part is an assessment where they are going to be assessed on conducting an investigation. There is a chemical reaction. It's asking for students to do that individually. And then they're going to explain what's happening in the chemical reaction. It's perfectly fine if you want to use the OpenSciEd assessment. Generally, people find that they are a bit too long. They're also some students can find them on the internet. So some teachers that I work with are developing assessments on their own to meet the performance expectations and meet their own school district's needs and student population needs. So the Taj Mahal assessment, I'm not linking it here because I do not want to be the reason students can find the summative assessment, but look in your Google Drive. The first part is about planning an investigation and observing chemical reactions. And the second part, there are two, and they get to choose. Part 2A is easier than part 2B. So I would go ahead and choose which one you're going to give to the class. If you have some real high flyers, you can give them 2B. It has an extra lesson level performance expectation. Whether you're going to give the OpenSciEd summative transfer task or you're going to develop your own, make sure you give yourself plenty of time to go through it, make some changes if you want to, and print enough copies for your class. So be prepared to do that. Let's talk a little bit about the teacher prep while we're at it. If you are going to do part 1 of the assessment, you're going to need these materials. And here's a little bit of materials prep. You're basically just going to give individual students possibly a digital thermometer. It will lead into our ideas for our next unit of endo and exothermic reactions. But they'll need calcium carbonate, some goggles, some water, a stirrer, some malic acid, and they're just going to, it's a very simple chemical reaction, and they're going to, you're basically going to be assessing them on the science and engineering practice of planning and carrying out an investigation. So if you're thinking about developing your own summative assessment, first of all, this is what I help teachers in school districts do. So reach out if you need any support. I'm happy to, work with you all. But this is the thing. We have some requirements we need to meet, and they're shared by Achieve's Task Annotation Project in Science. They shared some non-negotiables. I've linked the document here. There's lots of links out to other parts of their project, including sample assessments, but I just want to talk about the non-negotiables. Number 1, these assessments must be anchored in a phenomenon or a problem to be meeting the requirements of the NGSS or your state standards if they're similar to the NGSS. So for example, the Taj Mahal, we're talking about weathering and chemical reactions that happen to the marble. That's the phenomenon that is anchoring that entire assessment. It's not the same anchor as our unit, the bath bombs. It's a new one, very similar and in a new context. So the questions will all be about that phenomenon. Then it requires students to engage in sense making. This means that they are going to make sense of things in the assessment. It's going to not just be rote memorization and defining key vocabulary terms, but they're going to have to develop a model or analyze some data and answer questions that relate to those things. The next thing is that it requires both science ideas and practices. I would say it also requires cross-cutting concepts. So you're going to want your, and that would be sense making. You would want your questions to hit all three of these dimensions right here. However, that can be hard in a single question, especially if they're multiple choice, making three-dimensional questions. So one thing I do with teachers is we make question sets. And so a question set altogether will be three-dimensional. Maybe the first question has to do with modeling and science ideas, and the second question has to do about thinking about science ideas and through the lens of a cross-cutting concept. But all the questions together are considered a question set that will be three-dimensional. Also, it needs to make sense to students. This is really about equity. We're not going to assess on things that were not developed in the unit. So make sure you're not asking about phenomena that are so, not in students' lives. Maybe you're asking about chemical reactions in a volcano. Well, that has nothing to do with this unit. It needs to make sense to them. Make sure also the questions are all in grade band, that they were developed in the unit. The last one is that it needs to support the intended purpose and use. And that means that it meets the performance expectations. It hits the standards, whether it be the NGSS standards or your own state standards that are similar. It's going to make sure that you're hitting these standards. So as I write rubrics with teachers, one thing we do is we align. These are going to assess on which of these dimensions and which performance expectation. So we can use this for standards-based grading, or we can also just say, hold ourselves accountable. These questions relate to this PE. These questions relate to this PE. So as you go through, you will see the first one is all about modeling. They're going to need to develop a model in the assessment. It's going to talk about these things in their model. The second one is analyzing and interpret data. Now, if you want to do the chemical reaction that's provided in the assessment from OpenSciEd, you can take that data and interpret it. And then you could hit this PE, or you can give them a data set and have them interpret it. And we're really talking about, the properties before and the properties after. We've been doing these things along the way. We looked at flammability and density, and we've been developing students' ability to hit this along the way. Now it's time to officially assess it. This third one is develop and use a model to describe how the total number of atoms does not change. This is all about the conservation of mass, so that needs to appear in this assessment as well. Now, what doesn't need to appear in this assessment is this one right here. This is a life science standard. And if you can see, the science and engineering practice is obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. This means you're going to give them an article, you're going to give them a video, they're going to have an experience, and they're going to synthesize it and then communicate what they figured out. This one's all about the information that sensory receptors respond to in the brain, and the brain interprets them. This is broken up among many different units in OpenSciEd. In this unit, for 7.1, we're talking about odor, the sensory receptors in the nose. In 6.1, the light unit, we talk about sensory receptors in the eye. In 8.1, we talk about sensory receptors in your fingers, your touch receptors. So this performance expectation can be assessed with multiple opportunities. So personally, I would leave this one out of my summative assessment. It was already met, and there's multiple opportunities to do this in other units. Okay, so that's kind of my spiel on assessment writing. I will say that overall, if you've gotten to lesson 14 and you're still watching my video, congratulations. You are definitely putting in the time and effort it takes to get good at this. Remember, it's a journey. It's not just a one and done and you figured it out. You will get better over time. So congratulate your students for all they figured out, and I'm going to congratulate you because you figured out a whole bunch too. All right, good job.